Now, we're going to talk now to Tony Thompson, former British Transport Police Superintendent, 32 years service across major rail disasters, later the government's Regional Resilience Director of the South West and head of the UK Emergency Response for the British Red Cross. Tony, welcome to the show. Very nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Mike. Thank you very
for
much.
coming in. I don't know this story, and I've been in the journalism game for quite a long time, and I'm quite shocked that I don't know the story. So Clive Freeman is a man who's been in prison for 37 years for a conviction for arson and murder in 1989. Tell us the story.
Yes, in fact, he was arrested on the 2nd of June 1988 in Australia. He'd left the country, and he's been in detention ever since. So in 2 months' time, it'll be 38 years. Right. And that was 6 months before I was in charge at the scene of the Clapham train crash in '88, so a long time ago. He was described in the media at the time as it was one of the trial was one of the most extraordinary murder cases ever to appear before the Old Bailey. And the prosecution alleged that he had lured an unemployed homeless man off the streets of London, taken to him a flat in East London, in Rotherhithe, murdered him, set fire to the body with a view that the body would be his body double, so that he could claim on an insurance policy. Okay. And that was the basis of the allegation. Okay.
And did he ever do that? Did he ever claim to be did he ever claim that he was dead, if you like?
No, not at all. No, this plan that the prosecution alleged was completely ridiculous. Right. And if the police had done their job properly and investigated it properly, they would have seen that there was no evidence to even charge him, in my view.
Right. Okay. So what actually did happen, or what does he say actually did happen?
Well, he'd come across from Rhodesia, where he'd had a business over there, and was trying, because of the problems after the Bush Wars, and he was a soldier in the Rhodesian army, and he was trying to, he ran a large farm with about 600 employees. The economy at the time in former Rhodesia was in Zimbabwe was not good, and he decided to move his family somewhere safe, and he was looking at either the States or Australia. So he'd planned all this, and there's evidence to show that he'd planned. He was going to stay with a friend of his who used to work for him back in Zimbabwe, in Australia, which was where he was arrested on the 2nd of June 1988. The trial was in 1989. And he's been in custody, as I say, for virtually 40 years.
And so what linked him then to the arson and the murder?
He was staying. It was a friend's flat in Rotherhithe, and he was staying there. A friend of the family put him up while he was trying. He was basically transiting in the UK to try and get a new British passport so that he could go over to the States. He was going to renew a passport, and he was trying to improve his insurance policy, because the work he was doing is crossing borders in Africa, so he was in quite dangerous areas. And he had a trucking business, so he was driving. And his wife at the time, who sadly died in 1999, said to him, "You need to change your insurance policy from payment in the local currency, which had bottomed out, which is worthless, and get it payable in dollars or pounds." So that's what he did over here. Right. So it's a perfectly logical explanation. Unfortunately, he never ever gave his side of the story. He remained silent. He was advised by his lawyers, don't say anything. This was in Australia. So his side of the story was never, ever put forward. And when he came up for trial at the Old Bailey, the only things he said were not guilty twice, not guilty to murder, and not guilty to arson.
So he never took the stand?
He never took the stand. So the jury heard nothing about his side of the story at all. So it was a tsunami of prosecution evidence.
And so would you say that was as a result of the defence being in some way interfered with by the prosecution? I mean, why would a defence lawyer say to somebody like him, if he was innocent, don't tell what happened, don't tell your side of the story?
Well, there's a backstory to this which I can't reveal until he comes out of prison, which involves some political issues and issues back in Africa. Okay. So because of that, his solicitor at the time, or his barrister, said, if you get asked about this, you're going to have to answer it. And he decided that he wasn't going to do it. I mean, the prosecution portrayed him as a trained killer. Well, he was a mounted scout. He was a surveillance team, but because of
So
issues.
they were worried about questions that he might have to answer.
Exactly, yes.
Should they be put to him, which would sway the jury
Exactly.
into
But
thinking he was a murderer?
When he was questioned by the police, the Met Police went out to interview him several times in Australia before he was brought back to the UK.
Was he extradited back?
He was, well, Clive says he wasn't extradited. He said, I want to come back and clear this up.
Okay.
You know, it's not, I think they started extradition proceeding, but he came back and his solicitor said, don't say anything until you know what the evidence is against you. And the evidence against him was never, ever explained to him, because as soon as he came back to Heathrow, he was arrested, taken to Southwark and charged.
Right. And so are you able to say what he thinks happened to the man who died?
Well, the police and the defence say that he and Clive Freeman, and the man that died, had never ever met, but that clearly isn't true. And there's evidence that the police knew that they'd met each other, and the defence knew they'd met each other in a bar at Victoria Station. Right. Clive was very into racing. He did a lot of horse racing. He was a trainer. He was a jockey when he was younger, and he still does. He still follows the racing world now. And you know, when I see him, I take him in a racing paper, particularly with Cheltenham recently. Yes. He'd had some winnings, and he went into this bar at Victoria where the chap that died and somebody else saw him, got talking to him, bought a few beers. The man was the worst for drink, the other man, and fell off a stool, I think Clive said, and bumped his head. Anyway, Clive was getting ready to go and leave the country a couple of days' time, so he wanted to go back to Rotherhithe, and this guy lived in Brixton at the time, so this guy's friend helped him outside, put him in a taxi at Victoria Station, with a view to sending him home. But this guy was almost speechless, couldn't explain, the taxi drivers wouldn't take him. And Clive, being, well, he said, the good Samaritan, said, well, look, we can't just leave a bloke here. Back home, we would take him home. So he took him back to Rotherhithe with his mate, where they had some more drink, and eventually got rid of him. Now, Clive said when he was there, this chap, Clive had some money which he was getting ready to take away. He got rid of him out of the flat, and Clive thinks he came back. And he said the old Yale latch on the door, you could push the front door open and get in easily. But so they did actually meet, but Clive didn't know him before. Right. And when he found out that there'd been a fire in the flat, he was then on his way to the States.
Oh, so he wasn't. So he'd left the flat.
He'd left the flat. Yes.
Right.
So what happened on the night of the alleged murder? Clive and the prosecution and the defence both accepted. He checked into a hotel in Earl's Court at 10:30 at night. Very much the worst for drink. This is Clive Freeman.
The same day.
The same. No, this is the day after.
Okay.
That he'd been sorting out his affairs because he was leaving and not coming back. Right. So Clive went to He went to a nightclub that no longer exists near Earl's Court Tube, and wanted to say cheerio because his daughter was staying over here at the same time in a different place. So he went to see her when he thought it was in a nightclub. The nightclub bouncer wouldn't let him in because he said he was too drunk, and said, you need to go and sleep it off over the way. Yeah. And so he toddled off there, checked in, and we know he checked in at 10:30 at night, and all the records show he checked out at 8 o'clock the next morning, made his way, picked up his ticket, and then flew out to the country. Now, there's no forensic evidence, there's no evidence whatsoever to show that he, in this drunken state, got out of this hotel, somehow made his way back to Rotherhithe, got back into the flat, killed this bloke, set fire to the flat, then made his way all the way back to the hotel, checked in without being seen. Now, there's no evidence at all. Right. And there's no evidence, apart from, obviously, fingerprints where he'd been staying for a few months, to link him with the crime. So what
does he think happened then?
He doesn't know. I mean, he doesn't know. This chap clearly got back into the flat where he was found. He thinks he may have been looking for, having seen Clive sorting out some money when he was there. He thinks this chap had gone back. This man had previous convictions for dishonesty, and he thinks he must have broken in or tried to get back in. He had no idea that Clive was leaving, so he thinks that he must have gone in, tried to get in there, and got in there. We don't know, but there's no forensic evidence. But there clearly was a fire.
But there was a fire.
But there was a fire.
He was killed in the fire? Or?
No, there was this is where we get onto the pathology, which it becomes a bit more complicated. The pathologist carried out 4 post-mortem examinations on this guy that had sadly died. And there was clear evidence this man had consumed an awful lot of alcohol. There was he'd also been taking medicinal drugs, and his health was not very good. And the prosecution guy couldn't find any evidence that he died naturally. And then he came up with this idea that this man had died from an offence of Birkin, going back to the old Burke and Hare case in Scotland in 1828, because he thought he'd found some bruises on the back of his body. So there's no forensic evidence about that. But after the 3rd post-mortem, the police clearly hadn't found a cause of death, and there's evidence that the police had emailed the pathologist to say we need to get a positive on this to the pathologist. So there's a bit of influence being exerted there.
Yes.
But the defence at trial pulled in a leading forensic pathologist of many years standing, who said there's no evidence that this man was killed by a deliberate act. This man died of a combination, an injudicious combination of alcohol and medicinal drugs, plus whatever his health condition was. Now,
so he wasn't burned to death.
He wasn't burned to death. No.
He was asphyxiated by the smoke.
No, there was the only evidence we've got is what the pathologist found and he clearly did a very poor job on it and was roundly criticised over the years. But the body had been moved, although they thought it was a suspicious death. They moved the body out of the scene, which is where you would normally expect the examination, the pathologist to look at the scene and get an assessment. He was moved by the police. He ended up at Westminster Mortuary, and then they took some weeks to try and establish how this man had died. Now, the defence pathologist was appointed and got the file papers about 3 or 4 days before the trial started. No photographs, just a report. So that's all his assessment he was able to make. But he said, on what I've read, that the post-mortem pathologist has written in his pretty shabby report, suggests that this man died as a combination of medicinal drugs and excessive alcohol. But because when it came to trial the following year, in 1989, all the jury heard was prosecution evidence. Defence evidence about, no, this man didn't die. Prosecution evidence to say this man died from Birkin. So after about an hour and 20 minutes, the jury went out and found him guilty because they'd heard no other side.
No counter-argument. Now, so how did you get involved with this case?
Well, perhaps if I can before I can say that, what happened over the years, long before I got involved, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a recommendation, life for murder, with a recommendation of 13 years, the tariff, before he can be considered for release. That was increased by the Home Secretary at the day to 15 years, and he got 5 for the arson as well. So he got murder and arson. The two were clearly linked, according to the prosecution. So over the years, we've now got about 10 different forensic pathologists to say that the post-mortem that was carried out by the pathologist at the time was hugely flawed, and that the pathologist's findings that this guy died deliberately was complete nonsense. And going back to Clive's application to the Criminal Cases Review Commission, which had just been set up in the late 90s, his first application was put in 2000. I put in the 6th application in 2023 to the Criminal Cases Review Commission and finally managed to get it over the line. Okay. But if I can just explain how I got involved, I'm a member of the Veterans Advisory and Pensions Committee, well, my veterans badge on here, which is an unpaid volunteer appointment by the Ministry of Defence to support and help veterans and their families. And I have a particular interest in crime and the criminal justice system. So I started going to one of our local prisons just outside Bristol to meet veterans, where there's typically about 50 armed forces veterans in there, to provide sort of help and support on various matters. So I went there, I think it was on the first or second time, about 3 years ago, and I was just finishing this meeting with the veterans, and Clive came along with another chap, and the guy said, "Oh, can you have a word with Clive Freeman? He could do with your help." And so I said to Clive, what's the issue? And he said, "Oh, I've been wrongly convicted." I said, "Well, what of? And he said, well, murder. And I've been in prison for, 35 years, wrongly. So we had to leave then because I said, look, I'll come back. These are my details. I'll come back when the next one. I'll have a chat with you. And about 2 weeks later, I got a call from a guy called Terry Wilcock, who I thought was a lawyer. And he said, you said you could help Clive. So I said, yeah. I don't know anything about the case. And I said, are you a solicitor? And he said, no, I used to be in prison with him. But I've been out 10 or 12 years. And he's, as far as I'm concerned, he's innocent. He didn't commit the crime. Can you help him? So that's really where it started. Okay. So I started going back. And then 3 years later, having done a complete review of the case and taken the file away from a lawyer who wasn't doing particularly much on it, battling with the CCRC, on the 11th of August last year, I managed to get, at the 6th attempt, a referral to the Court of Appeal.
Right. So when are they going to look at it?
Well, we had a directions hearing on the 10th of March, a couple of weeks ago, and there's some various directions given by the courts, various bits of evidence that are needed. But sadly, we're not going to be able to get it in this side of summer, so it's going to be next, probably October onwards. So I told Clive the next day. He's obviously not very happy about it, but it's taking quite a long time. But there are two miscarriages of justice going on here. I'll make the point. One is the wrong conviction, which is clear. The second thing is this guy should have been released over 20 years ago. His tariff expired in 2003. So for the last 22 and a half years, he's had an exemplary conduct in the prison. He's been in open conditions for over 14 years in the prison I go to. And he doesn't pass the test to release test because
And what is that pass? Because they release lots of people who they shouldn't release.
Yes,
all the time.
Exactly.
They're consistently releasing people like that guy Pitchfork, for example, who's been released, and the first thing he did was to go back, and he was convicted of murdering 2 teenage girls. And brutally raping them. He gets released and he goes straight to a school and starts hanging around outside the gates and taking him back in again. So how has he not been released?
Well, that's the big question. And unfortunately, I'm battling with the MOJ, the Ministry of Justice. I'm battling with the prison service, and I'm battling with the parole board, who now won't talk to me about it because they
shocking.
Clive is nearly 83. He's got advanced prostate cancer. He's got mobility issues. He hobbles around, and he's an old man. He's got a big white beard, and a very vulnerable individual. Now, I looked at his parole board dossier, which has grown to about 250 pages over the years, and I said, "There's stuff in here that's incorrectly written down." And in February, I got the prison governor to admit that they'd incorrectly recorded information about him. For example, this is just one example. The trial judge said the death of the man, and I'm saying it wasn't a murder at all, but at the trial judge said death was not a violent process, it was suffocation, although there's no evidence about that. And yet, in his parole board dossier, when I'm going through it, they ticked the box to say that the index offence, the murder, had been committed using violent, excessive or sadistic violence. And I said, that's not right, and there are other things wrong with it. So they're correcting it. So I put in an application to the Ministry of Justice, their release team, on the 21st of December, and they were supposed to give you a reply within 2 weeks. Here we are 3 months on, and I'm still battling. I wrote the letter to Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, in 2024, saying this man should be released pending the CCRC considering the case. Of course, you don't get a reply from that. You go, you get an official writing some stupid letter about policy, and then I wrote again last week, and I'm still waiting. The Ministry of Justice know there's something wrong. They realise that, but they won't talk to me. This man should be released on humanitarian grounds. I've spun the application into contravening Article 3 of the Human Rights Act because he is in a state of hopelessness. He has got, I should say, he doesn't want to come out. He's saying, if you get me out on compassionate grounds, they're going to push my case further down the line. They're going to kick it down the long grass. He said, they want me dead. They want me out. But he's strong enough to see this out.
Well, it's an extraordinary story. Thank you for telling us all about it, because we're unfortunately at the end of the show. So Tony Thompson, that's the man you're listening to sitting here, has been working tirelessly to try and get this sorted out. And